Selamat pagi and selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri. That's how we say it in Malaysia and Singapore for the Eid celebration. And in Malaysia, festivities and the visiting continues to happen up to 30 days. So I'm kind of not too late with the wish. Today, it's actually episode 34 of the Product Uncensored show, and I'm your host, Colin Bell. For the regulars, thank you so much for being patient for this new episode. I know I missed April, but April was actually quite a busy month for me. I was like changing jobs and everything, so I couldn't get an episode out, and I sincerely apologize. But yeah, so we're here, and I have a great guest as well. So hopefully that makes up for it. If you're new here, then I've got to do the standard intros just so you know. Our videos are on YouTube, and if you are watching now, then you know the drill, right? Don't just click on that subscribe button, but smash that bell notification icon so that every time something new comes up, and also it makes it better for this show to get discovered as well. And also, yeah, share it with your friends too. That helps. Podcasts, we're available on all major podcasting platforms that should be showing up, I think, somewhere here. And don't forget to follow as well if you're on those platforms. So far, our current most popular platform is actually Spotify. And finally, if you want to support this show, there will be a link in the description where you can voluntarily buy me a coffee. And then if you don't, that's fine too. Okay. As usual, that's all I want to do on the intro side. Let's get down to introducing today's guest. Our guest today was previously the head of product at Grab. He's currently the chief product officer at SPH Media, one of the most prestigious media companies in Singapore. SPH stands for Singapore Press Holdings, if you're not clued in. He is an avid photographer outside of work, and he's also quite the rocker, which we will cover at the end. So make sure you stay tuned until the end. He's none other than Gaurav Sachdeva. Welcome to the show, Gaurav. How are you doing?
Hi, Colin. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And Salamat Hari Raya Aidil Fitri to you and all the listeners.
Well, I don't celebrate it, so but yeah, the listeners, we do have quite a few Muslim listeners. So yeah, I think for them it's been great. And in Malaysia, it's been the first time I think in 3 years that they're actually able to travel back for the
I know.
festivities. So I think it's been quite the traffic jam. Thankfully I didn't contribute to it, but I think for them it's been really, really tough. So a lot of them have taken extended leaves just to go home and be with their loved ones.
Yeah, the last 2.5 years have been crazy, and people have longing to meet families. And I'm so glad that all of this is becoming possible in Southeast Asia. Especially the connection between Singapore and Malaysia is really strong. We have people coming over to Singapore daily, working in JB,
Yeah.
which is a neighborhood in Malaysia, and it's just very, very, very grateful and very thankful.
Yeah, and I think you recently went back to India as well, right? You were able to go
That's
back first
true.
time in 2 years or something as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So
So I'm very happy that people are able to reunite with their loved ones.
yeah, I know. So hopefully, I we'll cover this a little bit later. One of the things I'm hoping to pick your brain a little bit about is, how did SPH go through the COVID era? Let's see whether we actually end up talking about it. But yeah, I mean, COVID has been tough on everyone. So yeah, for those of you who are still stuck, or you're just not comfortable going out yet, hang in there. Things are getting better. And of course, if you're not vaccinated, please go and get vaccinated before I reach out through this screen and I'll smash your head in. So anyway, probably lost like a few listeners, but anyway. So Gareth, thanks for coming on the show. Why
Pleasure.
don't you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure.
Yeah, and how you got into products, and then let's take it from there.
All right. Let me start from the very beginning then. I'm a computer science major, so I did an engineering BTech in computer science and engineering long, long ago. And at that time, there was this mad rush of people finishing their engineering degrees and going for MBAs. And I was like, I'm a non-conformist, right? So, so I decided instead to sit for my GREs and get those scores, and thought that if I want to do well in computer science as an area, I should probably do a master's. And before all the results could materialize or I could, apply to the US, I got a job in a small startup at that point in time in the area of electronic design automation. So for the uninitiated, EDA is a space where we write compilers and simulators so that chip design companies can verify their designs much before the design actually gets printed on silicon. And printing on silicon is a batch process. So millions of chips get printed in one go, which means that if something goes wrong, then it goes in the entire batch and you have to recall, and it's a huge cost to the organization. So that was the value proposition of the organization that I started working in. And there I was sitting in the middle of all PhDs in electronics, and I was a computer science guy. That was both intimidating but also very inspiring. It was inspiring because everybody realized the potential I had, which I didn't see in myself. But some of my colleagues and bosses saw, and they inspired me to go for my master's, which actually gelled well with the path that I was charting out for myself. So I started applying for scholarships, and I got Commonwealth scholarship and ended up in Cambridge University in an MPhil course, which was the preliminary step towards doing a PhD. And lo and behold, that was in machine translation and natural language processing. This is 2004, by the way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, this would have been quite a while back. So you're
That's
pretty
right.
much, being a pioneer taking that at that time, right?
That's right. So, in fact, some of the algorithms I used in that time for pattern recognition or for supervised and unsupervised learning um, include things like hidden Markov models, which are kind of passe now. And that is why, in at that time, it was still a research area. Um, I remember I had a tussle with my supervisor. I wanted to do a PhD in sentiment analysis, and nobody had thought about sentiment analysis. We were just, you know, struggling with creating proper question answering systems and translators from one language into another language. And so I decided, fine, let me just go back to the industry. And because I had emerged from electronic design automation, I went and joined a much larger, much bigger company in that space called Synopsys. Synopsys is based in Mountain View and is probably the largest player in EDA domain. The other players being Mentor Graphics and Cadence. These are names that typically people in that industry have heard. And I had a great time. I'm not only as an engineer but also as a singer. As Colin, you were mentioning, I formed my first corporate rock band in Synopsys, and we not only cracked multi-threaded CPUs for our designs, but also cracked all marketing events in Bangalore, which is the Silicon Valley of India, visiting and doing corporate events for our company. And actually, that's what got me started. I was going from one organization to another. I was writing code for Texas Instruments and ST Microelectronics, Intel, going and working on site with their engineers, trying to make their chips succeed. But there was always this question: why am I doing this? What is the business value am I adding to the organization that I'm going and working with? And I think that intrigue or that curiosity led me on the path of product management. By the way, until then, I did not know what product management was. But I
As it's
knew that.
seemingly with almost everyone from the same era as we did, right? Kind of nobody knew what that was. And lo and behold, we just stumbled into it, right?
That's right. The only thing I knew was that I needed to be at the cusp of business and customers. And if you have been an engineer for a very long time, like myself, for about 5 years or so, you kind of start getting typecasted. When recruiters approach you, they mostly approach you with engineering roles only.
Mm.
Um, And so for me to break away from the engineering mindset and also this tag that I'm a electronics computer science guy, I decided to go and do an MBA. And post my MBA, I landed my first job in product management. Um, One of the reasons why I landed this job is because during my engineering internships, I had worked at Adobe in their innovation group. And in like 2, 3 weeks, I had written a new product which took a document, a Word document, from the doc format to a .pdf format without needing Microsoft Word installed on your machine.
Nice.
At that point in time, you needed to have MS Word installed on your machine for Acrobat to talk to MS Word
Mhm.
and then re-engineer all the fonts and formatting and layout of the document so as to produce a PDF. So I really enjoyed that part, and my supervisor at that time had ventured into product management. So I had during my last semester of MBA, I had lots of conversations with industry experts, and when I expressed to them that I find myself being able to add value in the technology domain, they all recommended that, hey, there's this new emerging area called PM. Why don't you try that out? And I
Mm.
ended up in Adobe and I became product manager for Creative Suite. We shipped two versions, 5.5 and 6. And then Instagram got acquired by Facebook for $1 billion. And that ran a chill down everybody's spine that what people start editing their images not on Photoshop,
Yeah.
but on Instagram. The entire cash cow business, which is Acrobat and Creative Suite, Photoshop, will come crashing down.
Mm.
So that was really my venture or introduction into product management, and I did a lot of work. We literally together invented the Creative Cloud,
Mhm.
and for your listeners who are designers or from creative agencies or even product managers, if you use Creative Cloud, the app that sits on your desktop or on your mobile phone is really my baby. So that was my beginning in the area of product management.
Nice. I was just gonna say that I was gonna ask you about that because yeah, my I still have a subscription to the Creative Cloud. My wife uses it. So
Awesome.
yeah, so there you go. I'll make sure I'll let my wife know afterwards. Hey, by the way, that Creative Suite that you're using on your desktop, I just interviewed the guy. So very nice. Yeah, okay. So you got into product management then, and then after that you obviously went to Autodesk, and then that's where it gets interesting because after that you went to Grab. So you were
Right.
head of product for growth at
Yeah.
Grab. You were there for 2 years, and then
Right.
after that you ended up in SPH, Singapore Press
Right.
Holdings. So
Correct.
first question is, your time at Autodesk, and I believe Autodesk is actually quite the huge organization, right?
Correct.
And it's very enterprisey. So you taking this step to jump into head of product at Grab, and this is like what 2016. So Grab
Right.
would not be the behemoth that it was now. So I think when you joined, they were probably like what 400, 200.
Yeah, the engineering and product team was about 50, and within 2 months I joined, it became 100.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's where the story that I want to hear your story is. So first question is, what made you decide to jump from this really stable enterprise company and jump straight into this, frying pan of startups?
Great question, actually. And in order for me to answer that question, you'll have to give me 30, 40 seconds more because I want to set the context of why this jump happened.
Take your time.
So you know that I was in Adobe, right?
Yes.
And we had launched Creative Cloud,
Mhm.
and that was the transition of Adobe from a desktop perpetual licensing
Yes.
DVD based business to a SaaS model.
Yes.
Uh, it was in the software industry for the first time after Netflix that somebody had cracked the subscription
Subscription.
model well. Microsoft also had a subscription model for their Office
Office.
suite, but they had both perpetual as well as subscription available. So, users could choose.
Mm.
In the case of Adobe, they had taken the decision to kill the DVD business, the licensing, that 16-digit, 24-digit license key
Oh,
that you had to
I remember
earlier.
those.
Right. So it was kind of unique. And Adobe did really well. And Autodesk saw this. For now, Adobe is in creative design and Autodesk is in engineering design. So most people know Autodesk by the AutoCAD line of products.
Correct.
But what most people don't know is that Adobe and Autodesk also compete on design software. So 3ds Max, Maya, Smoke, for 3D graphics as well as for film editing, compete with Adobe's Premiere Pro and so on and so forth.
Right.
And in this, Autodesk also changed their strategy and wanted to move to subscription model. So that's how I got hired into Autodesk, to bring those principles, learnings, and inferences from product management side into Autodesk. The common thing between the two was that not only were they competitors, but both were very large organizations. And in case of Adobe, I was working out of India, and so frequently chatting with strategy and the larger product team in the US. So I
Mm.
would change my time zones, young and erratic ways of being. And in case of Autodesk, I was hired in Singapore. That's how I came to Singapore. And again, the teams making decision making teams used to be in the US. So I would either frequently travel there, or just switch my time zone to be in the same meeting time zone that
Mm.
these organizations were. The one another thing that was common is that decision making was a bit slower, and that the distance that I had by being in Singapore or India with the US did not help. I had to like work 10 times harder to get the same impact as someone who was co-located with the decision making team, strategy teams there. So both of these factors contributed towards me looking at, hey, that if I have to work 10 times harder, I might as well work in a startup. um, the good thing was that from both of these organizations, my trips to the US, to San Francisco, had exposed me to Uber.
Yep.
I was probably amongst the first few riders of Uber Share, when I remember they had launched a $7 promo. You could go anywhere in the Bay Area if you share that ride with someone else. And Grab Taxi in Singapore was growing bigger and bigger. And I knew that if Uber was an exciting venture, then I'm sure Grab Taxi would be also, knowing that they are growing in Malaysia as well as in Singapore.
Mm.
So I started conversations, and that's how I landed in Grab. And in 2 weeks at Grab, it felt like I've been here forever. So that's how I ended up in a product role. So I was not head of products when I joined Grab. I was a lead slash director.
Okay.
And then in time, I grew into the head of product role at Grab.
I see. I see. So just to push it a little bit more, right? So you were saying that your first 2 weeks at Grab, you felt like you'd been there forever, right? What was
Right.
the main thing that made it feel that way? Was it the pace of work? Was it
Right.
the load of the work? What was it that was such a difference between enterprise and enterprise software versus a startup?
I I think the very first thing that struck me was that the people were extremely motivated, and that level of self initiative to get things done was tremendous.
Hmm.
So, and I love that because I love working with smart people. And in a week or two's time, I was able to clearly get a sense of how deeply motivated and connected these folks are to delivering an outcome that Grab was after, was just amazing. And
Hmm.
that self motivation that is very infectious.
Yeah.
So, when you see your team around you all geared towards that goal, you yourself also get self motivated. So that was number one. Number two was that I realized that unlike a large organization where processes are set up, where roles are very well defined, here I was in a situation where there was nobody to tell me what I need to do, right? And that discovery of the number of problems that we needed to solve for the product line that I was looking at was very exciting because I could just pick up any problem and start solving it. There was no dearth of issues, and there was
Mm.
nobody stopping you that, hey, this is more important or this is more important. So, your immediate application of being able to prioritize, making trade offs, what to go after, which relationships to build, which teams to have conversations with, how to how to just on your way to the office talk to the drivers, ask about their pain points, and better the driver side of that product.
Mm.
And in the early days when you are not corrupted by the culture of an organization, even though it's a fast paced organization, you could bring in a third person's passenger perspective and add value to the organization.
Mm.
The third thing was that the leadership team was very open to listening to feedback. They frequently had connection sessions with the entire team in Grab. Maybe it was easier then because we were only 50 people in the
Mm.
technology. And the team was growing really fast. Like I told you, from 50 to 100, it just
Within, yeah.
happened fairly quickly. But it was the commitment. You would see Anthony Tan and Wheeling Tan, the co-founders, walking the talk. You would see them energetically moving them, and that is very inspirational. And I think
Mm.
that's what gets a startup to focus on the end outcomes and be extremely motivated to deliver. So within 2 weeks, I had discovered problems that I needed to solve. We had done some basic product market validation for some of the hypotheses we had. And if I were in Adobe or Grab, I would have just started writing my spec in those first 2 weeks. And here I was pretty much almost having validated and now talking to the business teams that, hey, here's a solution that, together we can co-develop. Here are a few hypotheses. Let's figure out how do we A/B test them. So that's why those first 2 weeks, like I had known more people in 2 weeks than I had ever before. The problem that I
Mm.
had was I had to somehow keep their names in my mind and not.
Yeah, okay. I am horrible at names, like really, really bad. Like I can remember faces. So I always tell people when I meet them for the first time, like I do apologize. I'm probably going to forget your name in 30 seconds. And they've got these like articles where they tell you how do you remember somebody's name? You associate it with something at that point in time. Remember, I've tried that. It doesn't work. So maybe I just have really bad short-term memory.
It's the
Yeah.
same thing. It's very hard to remember names.
Yeah. But coming back to what you mentioned, right? So the interesting question here is because you said when you joined Grab, it was almost like a sort of like a blank sheet, right? And you could really decide on the number of problems. You could, decide to go down the rabbit's hole, and then you could decide, okay, these are some of the areas where I wanted to focus. So
Right.
the question here is how what was the remit given to you when you joined, or was it like literally like, okay, you're going to be growth and that's all we care about, you can start anywhere or and anyhow, and were they did they give you like some metrics to hit, some KPIs, what was it that you got when you started?
Right. So, like I said, I didn't start with growth when I joined Grab.
Okay.
Actually,
Okay.
growth as a squad or a tribe or a tech family or a product family that we used to, that
Mm.
phrase we used to use in Grab,
Hmm.
came out much later. When I came in, the problem that I was given was that of an internal tool, um, and which was also challenging for me because all this time I had been building products which were extremely customer facing, like Creative Suite or AutoCAD, where I would
Yeah.
be on customer side talking to them and then bringing in problems and requirements.
Yeah.
Here I was supposed to make an internal tool, but
Okay.
the power of that internal tool is that this, if anything went wrong with that internal tool, then the decision making on how our drivers are doing, what is our market share, what is profitability per ride, what is driver utilization, how well, what is the ROI of our promo codes that we are delivering to get passengers to stick with our platform and not go to Gojek or to Uber. That was the impact. So I started with that internal tool, and within that internal tool, as we were developing, I also saw another gap in the organization. The one good thing that a large organization does is that it instills in all of its employees this sense of talking to your users, the sense of talking to our customers, more so in product. So I used to spend a lot of time in Adobe and Autodesk talking to our customers, not only directly to them, but also spending time in the large customer support centers that these organizations typically have. And I used to get, diamonds by just talking to agents. And I realized that that was a that was an ignored area, possibly because Grab was moving at such a high speed with primary metrics of market share and profitability of their rides, that what our customer experience is when they call into our call centers was completely ignored. So I took that as an independent challenge, which nobody was expecting me to. My primary responsibility still was that internal tool.
Right.
And I went into the customer support center. I started a program where every new employee and every product leader, even the CEO and the co-founders, had to go through this onboarding of spending 2 hours in the customer support center, shadowing an agent and listening to their calls, so that that empathy for your user begins right there. When you hear that person calling and complaining that they are not able to use your app, or driver misbehaved, or the car never came, or the driver took the longer ride, and how that agent who has not developed your product is fielding questions that you are better able to answer compared to them, is very humbling. So I connected our internal tool with our customer support tools, and we made a lot of enhancements. And nobody asked me to do that. So that is where what I meant, that nobody would come and tell you where problems exist. If you discover a problem, you got to prove that yes, this is a problem worth solving. You convince the leadership team, it becomes a priority, and that happens really fast. It's not like you go through 6 month cycles of backlog grooming and business case creation, and then somebody will give you a heads up. Okay, then there'll be a next budget cycle in which some money will be given to you. Not like that. So that's how fast we moved, and that's what I love most about Grab.
Yeah, I think one of the things now is actually the fact that you get to listen to the customers, and that's something that I also feel that is really important, especially for product, right? One of the things that I always say is that your team or your organization, as a product manager, you would feel the shortcomings and the failures when you listen to the frontliners, because it is insane, right? I used to work in a digital products company, and we would sit down every few months to just listen, and they're just getting hammered, right? And you feel like, oh my gosh. So every time you fail, these poor fellows get it first, and they have to stay calm and stay composed, and I'm like, oh gosh. So yeah, that was always the impetus to always say, yeah, that's why we have to do better, right? So
absolutely,
yeah, fully agreed there. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. So let's then cover a little bit more about your then moving to SPH, because again, so you're at this like you were mentioning, it's like this rocket ship, and then you suddenly decide to go to SPH. And SPH, like I've the listeners and viewers, SPH is Singapore Press Holdings, which is a traditional print company, media print company. And so yeah, it sounds almost antithetical of everything that you said that attracted you to Grab, and then you go back the other side. So
Right. So, Colin, by this time in Grab, I have built many products. I have started a new product family of Grab, of growth, and I'm making product managers out of folks who are either in strategy or in operations. So that entire concept of building product teams had already materialized for me in Grab. In March 2018, Grab completed the acquisition of Uber's operations in Southeast Asia. So that entire focus that we had about kicking Uber out and being the market leader and winning Southeast Asia, um, my life had come a full circle by that time.
okay.
And so I was looking at what to do next. Push forward in the transportation business that Grab had, or try and foray into the financial services aspects that Grab was growing in, which by now has become really big. So this is 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, some leaders, and some of those leaders from SPH had reached out to me about a chief product officer role. Um, and when I started having those conversations, first of all, I was not interested. I was really moving forward to continue my career in Grab. But when I started talking, I realized that there is a very huge opportunity in the role that SPH was offering. Number one, of course, was set up a product and design team from scratch, which any product person would want to do as they grow in their career. You in large organizations, you almost always inherit a product team or a design team, but here is an opportunity for you to create it from scratch and create it in such a way that it makes a difference to the organization. And the second thing was that more than the product and the technology challenge, it was a mindset challenge. Here was an organization which had been a monopoly, and had done media monopoly, and and had seen days where people would line up in front of their offices to put ads into the newspaper, and had seen and was now seeing a decline in print circulation because most people were consuming their content and news and information from rather free sources, and had stopped subscribing to newspaper. For that organization to be moved into a digital future, I realized that this is not only technology, but you will have to get people to think differently. They did not know what product management was. They knew they had experienced it with previous attempts, but not the way Grab had been doing, or not the way a pure technology organization had been doing. For them, designers were mostly pretty picture creators. A business stakeholder would come and say that, "Hey, I'm running a campaign. Can you draw this for me?" And similar was the story on the engineering side. Somebody from business or somebody from editorial teams would come that, "Hey, can you build that portal for me? Do it this way, do it that way." And project managers would go ahead and build that. And those project managers typically emerge from the IT organization rather than a technology engineering organization. So that felt like an opportunity that I might not get by staying in technology organizations. Yes, those challenges also exist in large tech companies. I had seen bottlenecks and mindset challenges in Adobe and Autodesk also, even in Grab, when we would debate. But to introduce new concepts, and instill them such that you become indispensable to that organization to succeed, was something that was beyond. At that point in time, I thought I would probably not get this opportunity of change management, technology building, team building, and being able to convince the board of one of the national assets in Singapore, right? We are in the business of creating opinions and thought processes, bringing facts out into public domain so that people of the region can stay informed. And I think that is a much greater mission than I had imagined it to be. And that's why I decided, all right, let's plunge my into it.
So the interesting thing is you were talking about how, by moving to SPH, you were literally going to be not just going up against a technological challenge, but you'd also be going like sort of going against the grain in terms of now you're having to move everyone to a different mindset, right? Because traditionally, when you're very comfortable, things have been working, you don't want to break what's not fix what's not broken, right? And that for you wasn't a red flag. That for you was like, oh, I want that challenge, because most people tend to be the other way around, right? It's like, oh wow, this is going to be huge.
Actually, that's the beauty of having spent time in a startup, where problems stop becoming intimidating. Problems start becoming as, hey, I have so much to do. There is so much opportunity to do something. I mean, when there are no problems to solve, it'll be such a dull life. Right?
Yeah, interesting. And I believe that also as sorry, maybe I should ask you as a question instead. So, as your role in SPH, what is your remit? Like, I believe you're not just taking care of the print business, but also in charge of the digital incubation teams and things like that, right? So maybe you can explain a bit more.
Yeah, I'm only taking care of the digital part. I don't take care of the print part at all. So, as the chief product officer, my remit is entirely digital, and getting subscription growth as one of the objectives, and also advertising revenue growth. So the first thing I did was to set up top level business metrics from a product point of view.
Yeah.
And
your
then,
leading indicators.
That's right. Leading indicators, and also getting people used to looking at lagging indicators also. What ends up happening in a monopoly business is that people talk and become familiar with jargon. Like they would say data, 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 data. They would say analytics, analytics, analytics. But what to do with it? I mean, even if big TV screens are in your office rooms and numbers are flashing and charts are flashing, is that what being data centric all about? Having TV screens? The real meaning of putting up those analytics data in front of you is so that you can look at it and draw inferences. Now that has to be taught by practice in some of the live projects that you're working on. One could bring in trainers and external organizations to teach you how to leverage data, but they would come and go. It's up to the organization, then the employees, then to apply those concepts and learnings into their daily lives. And I think that intellectual rigor was needed, which I was trying and building in my early days. I knew that people knew everything.
Okay, folks, we're back. I'm so sorry. We had a bit of a glitch in the recording, but thankfully, we're all back now. So, Gaurav, you were just saying that, when you came to SPH, you were dealing with people who knew everything. So, yeah, let's pick it up from there.
Yeah, people knew terms because they had been exposed to these terms. It's not that, digital transformation journey was happening for the first time when I came into the organization. But the real meaning and behind that jargon and how to execute on it is what was one of the biggest challenges. And that's what I started about. The goals were pretty simple: build intellectual rigor, get people to use data and draw inferences, teach them. So a lot of my work began by coaching and teaching them how to do. And when they saw that, the CPO is on the ground working with, his sleeves folded, writing specs, solving business cases on the whiteboard with them, and, really being part of them is probably one of the early successes. That's why people began listening to me rather and saying that, hey, who's this new guy who thinks he's from Grab and therefore can tell us how to do the job that we've been doing for the last 40 years or so. And for me personally, I think it was more humbling to be able to do that. It also meant that my tolerance levels went up dramatically. It also meant that if I had if I had to if I had to do a deck on what product management and design is, I had to do it 200 times, and every time I had to do it with the same enthusiasm and same gusto as I did it for the first time. I needed to make sure that the jokes that I'm cracking in that presentation are still funny and that I am enjoying those jokes during those presentations. And that was it. And my training at Grab actually helped me a lot. One thing that we truly believed in Grab was, number one, your problem is my problem. It's not that, if I'm blocked on something and I've sent an email, now my job is done. It is also my job to make sure that I follow up and get my stuff done. So and make the other person on the dependent team realize that, hey, something is blocked and the business is stalled. So your problem is my problem is one key thing that everybody believed in. And the second thing that we believed as a mantra in the growth team is that if there is a wall that you hit, no matter what you do, if you have to cross the wall, whether you go around it, bazooka it, build a tunnel underneath it, you go on top of it, whatever you do, you find a way to get through that wall. And I think that training by setting up the growth team at Grab really helped me in forever staying optimistic and forever staying enthusiastic when people didn't understand what I was telling them, or didn't want to understand what I was telling them, and still going ahead and making a difference. It also meant hiring a lot for good people, good talent. That's how I started started bringing Product Hunt into SPH, just to send out feelers in the larger product community within Singapore that, hey, there's stuff going on at SPH as well. And that's how we met in one of the Mind the Product conferences.
Yes.
Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah.
So when I was in office, I was doing skunk work with people who showed the spark of being product managers and grooming them into being product managers. And outside, I was trying to recruit product managers at the board level and at senior editors level. I was trying to convince them why you should listen to us, and how we can make a difference. And in order to do that, we really had to show them results, right? And that's how this all that journey happened.
Nice. All right, so here's the question time, right? So you talked about how you came into SPH and a lot to do with mindset, and I think the situation or scenario that you described is actually very similar to what other people are doing. I think the scale is different. But I think it's really, when you're coming in, especially as a leader, you're no longer just a product manager, right? Where your team is your product, basically. And you talked about having to roll up your sleeves and talk to people. So question here is, as a product leader who now manages a team, what would you recommend people do first? Do you recommend that you sort out the house? And by that, I mean, you do the talking to all the stakeholders, or do you solve problems by yourself so let me put the example here. You've got a team of 5 product managers who are new. They don't know the ropes yet. So do you initiate on their behalf and then let them tag along, or do you mentor them and then let them lead the way, right? Because I think these two, there are debates around both ways, but I'm curious to know how you did it and what you thought worked for you.
Right. I think the question hidden in there, Colin, is or the answer to that question has hidden in it your leadership style. And my leadership style is very coaching based. So the way I did it, and there is no right or wrong way of doing it. The way I did it is that I made sure that first of all, I build a rapport with the stakeholders.
Mm.
Um, and if they believe in me, then it's easier for me to get them to believe in my team. And it depends upon it also depends upon the maturity level of the product manager in my team. So for the very young ones, who had been in product for about a year or were just venturing into product, I would accompany them. And during my one-on-ones, we would solve problems together, where I would nudge them, coach them, teach them how to think differently from their normal way of thinking. If there were more senior product managers, then if I have built confidence with them, then I would just let them be. I'm not an interfering guy.
Mm.
But I would make sure that I make the introductions to the larger team of stakeholders, and I would make sure that I continue to check in with them frequently. When my team had scaled to about 20, it slightly became untenable because I can't have, I couldn't have so many one-on-ones and still be productive at my work. So then, how do you plan your time such that you still keep in touch with what's going on with the PMs and are making sure that you're reviewing their work and giving them guidance. It becomes more of coaching rather than doing things on your own. Yes,
Yeah.
there will be times where you will brainstorm solutions and you would prioritize solutions together more as a coaching method, co-learning method, rather than me wanting to go and do their stuff for them.
Yeah.
And then I leave it up to them to execute. But it's really important that when you step away from dealing directly with your engineering teams, you make sure that the quality of work doesn't suffer. You set metrics and goals for your teams. We tried many things. Some teams which were extremely agile, we set up OKRs for them, and there were some teams which were still grappling with agile and waterfall.
Mm.
So we let them follow what was comfortable to them, and get into the groove of working like a squad together. And once they started working like a squad together, we then started introducing processes.
Mm.
And so that's really that. There were a few PMs who needed more help compared to others, and in those cases, we would set up war rooms where I would also come. And in those war rooms, engineering manager would be there, engineers would be there, I would be there, that my product manager would be there, and we would together solve problems. If it meant that there's a release going to happen in like 2 weeks time, and I was not happy with the quality of the output so far based on the demo builds that I have seen so far. We would get into that war room and we would solve issues, and I would help them prioritize. Many times you see that many times what happens is that teams are not able to figure out what is more important than the other.
Mm.
And in those situations, if you are there as a decision maker and as a friend, you make yourself vulnerable, that hey, I'm as much at stake as you are. And you break that barrier of hey, you're sitting with the chief product officer of the organization. It becomes easy.
Mm.
And I think and that has to be done and practiced right from the beginning. If you just show up once in 2 weeks or 3 weeks in that war room, then everybody will be fearful. But
Mm.
if you are with the team on the ground, sitting with them, going out for beer, going for lunches together with the team, it helps break that barrier. It helps make your team structure very flat.
Mm.
It empowers people to ask difficult questions to the most senior most person in the organization. I think that's what makes the organization tick.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. I think, building trust, being there, Those were the
Right.
two things that I think were important coming out of what you were saying, right? And also, given your leadership styles, you may want to do things differently. But yeah, always good to know what you did in reality. So that's the main crux of the question, knowing how Gaurav did it at SPH, right? So then the next question is, so when you came on board, the mindset change, and you were saying a lot of it had to do with data, right? Like, so what did, or how, maybe not what, I think the how is more important, of how did you decide on where you would want to get the quick wins, and where did you want to really get into the weeds to solve the big problem? Because I would imagine that you coming on board as the CPO would have been like, a lot of still massive dependency on the physical print side of things to generate
Yeah.
revenue, and your goal, you would have been to move this more to the digital side. So like, how did you do it, and like, what did you do?
Sure. So the engineering teams existed in SPH when I came in.
Mm,
It's just that the product function and design function was not there. So people were used to working with engineers, but they had their own ways. Like engineers would come and complain to me that ad hoc so many things come from our editors or from business teams, and when we try and tell them that no, we can't do it, then there's a tussle and there's a breakage in the or kink in the relationship.
mm,
Um, so the first most essential thing for me was to build this understanding um, and empathy between engineers for the demands of the editorial business, and in the editorial and business teams, empathy for how engineers work.
mm,
And usually it is not that people are people by themselves are adversarial in nature. They are not enemies. We are all humans at the end of the day. It's the lack of familiarity. So identifying the issue that is making them push back onto you is really important. A simple example was this, where they didn't know how engineers function, and engineers didn't know how editors function, and just bringing familiarity brought them closer. Second thing was, for me to execute and bring in a different mindset, I had to show things by example, by doing
mm,
things. And I had to do that quickly to get the quick wins, like you mentioned. So there were two strategies I deployed. One was um, run small experiments and then show instant results. And small experiments would give you results in 2 weeks to 3 weeks time. And the second was look for teams which are hungry for change. And SPH is a very large organization. There are four different newsrooms. Um, Straits Times, Business Times, Chinese newsrooms, and Tamil newsroom and Malay newsroom. Actually, five different newsrooms. So I started the time that I spent with each of those stakeholders. I was trying to gauge who is hungry, who can I work with to deliver that first outcome such that people can turn their heads. So one of the first few experiments I ran was with Chinese Media Group, which was about their newsletter readership rates. And I was sitting in a meeting where a new newsletter had been launched and people were assessing the results. What were the email open rates? And when they saw that email open rates had actually declined, the solution that everybody jumped to was, let's write more content. And I was like, if your email rates are down, the solution, how is the solution write more content? Because you people have not even read the content you put out in those newsletters. So then I introduced to them the concept of A/B testing. I introduced the concept of, hey, let's tackle the problem at hand, which is why are people not opening your emails? Are you sending them at a time at which they are very busy? Is
mm,
your email getting buried under spam? Are you is your subject line not attractive enough? And when they started seeing that there's a structured way of thinking towards solving problem before we jump into writing more content, because that's what journalists do, right? Their job is to write more content. They jumped on to the ideas I was giving them. However, the concern was that if we send, say, for example, reminder emails during the day, the subscribers of newsletters would churn away. So I told them that, hey, we'll run the experiment for 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks, here is how we will use data. We will keep monitoring your churn rate um, every day. And the day our churn rate in the experiment becomes greater than your natural churn rate, we will stop the experiment. And during the 2 weeks of running that experiment, the churn rate actually reduced. Readership increased by 40%, and then it became a mainstay. And that's how the Chinese media group then started believing in the approaches that we were taking. And similar strategies I applied with the low-hanging fruit, with hungry people who wanted to make a difference, which are always there in an organization. I began working with those editors, and we created value in those newsrooms. That really was the simple strategy. Show them experimentation and find out people who are willing to make a change with you.
Yeah, I think that's again, great example of how you don't take too much, but work with what you have, and take advantage of the situations that favor you. So yeah, I think that was really, really good. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So the other question that I sort of got a half answer from you, but I wanted to dive a bit more in was, so you were talking about the 5 main newsrooms, but I believe SPH also has a digital innovation arm. Do you handle that as well?
We used to have a digital innovation arm.
Okay.
Long ago.
Okay.
And they were, I didn't, so digital innovation arm was mostly looking at startups and ventures that were interesting enough for us to invest in. And if there is synergy, then try and incorporate it within our products.
I see.
So I was not directly looking into the running of the digital arm, but some of the startups that the digital arm was working with, I was instrumental in conversations. So SG Kmart, Fast Jobs, I know all of those folks very closely. There's Handshakes, Chope. For those who don't know, Chope was actually an SPH subsidiary, and so on and so forth. So how we could leverage some of the work that these small startups are doing and incorporate them into our products was where I interacted with that group.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. So because my question was going to be like, how do you? Because one of the things that I think at somebody at your level, right, where you're managing, different teams, different offerings, is always the question of how do you, some people call it different names, right? Some say multitask or context switch, and what do you do to make sure that you can handle all of these context switches?
Right. Different people have different ways of dealing with stresses and also context switches.
Sure.
My way of dealing with stress and context switch is that I make sure that when I enter a meeting, I enter that meeting prepared, and all the other baggage that I'm carrying from the other meetings of other conflicting products, I leave outside of that meeting. So when I am in a meeting or in a discussion about a product, I try to make sure that I'm 100% focused only on that product. That doesn't mean that if there are interactions with other adjacent products, I keep my eyes closed to them, because that would not be prudent, because we are growing the business. But if there's a problem at hand for a particular product, we focus only on that. It's easier said than done. I've had long hours and long meetings. I used to miss having a good coffee shop around, because that used to be my way of breaking myself from the routine. So I would typically just go out, grab a cup of coffee, and go change the scenery and come back, and then plunge myself into the context switch. Interestingly, SPH had a very beautiful terrace, um, where the gardeners had done a great job of landscaping. So I would, quite often just go to the terrace, take a walk, and come back. That's how I dealt with context switching. Also, I have my own interests in music and art. For instance, not many people know that for the last, until COVID happened, 7 to 10 years before that, I have watched a movie in a theater every Friday, as a means of catharsis. And I start my Friday, no matter what time I end. If my work finishes at 11 in the night, then I still make sure that I have some enjoyment on Friday itself, so that my weekend seems longer, because Sunday afternoon work would start coming back into my head. And so this is one another way of dealing with context switches and stresses. Other is and the third one is, really make your team your friend. I would frequently go out to nearby bars with my team, or with engineers, or with other stakeholders, or whoever was available, and we would discuss about our stresses in office. And every time you would figure out that you're not alone. Right? And it works both ways, because if I am a senior guy, then my younger colleagues realize that, hey, he's going through the same problems as we do. So you become vulnerable, and and at the same time you realize that I'm not the only one who's feeling this way. And now that I'm a senior guy, I can't complain. I'm the one who has the mandate to solve these problems or get these problems solved. So connecting on the ground also is a way of catharsis. Also is a way of context switching easily and keeping your stresses aside.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely agree about the part where, you sort of take a break. I used to do that as well. Like, just go down to wherever there's a coffee shop, you get a coffee, just sit down there and, pretty much stone out for a bit, just to like it's like, okay, I need to relax. But the interesting part for you was to say that, like speaking to the teams was a way of catharsis for you. So that is quite different from what I've spoken to other people. So that is interesting.
So I think the story there is that I believe that when you are blocked on a problem, solving somebody else's problem, which is a different problem, opens up new perspectives.
So okay, that's a very different way
Yeah.
of thinking. Okay,
So
okay.
when I'm stuck on something, I try and look for, okay, who else has some problem? Let me try to solve their problem. And it takes my mind off completely from the
Right.
issue that I am at. And when I come back to the problem I'm supposed to solve, I have a different lens now.
I see. Okay. Okay. Well, so that's a really interesting nugget, right? Like, if you're having a problem that you can't solve, maybe you should go look for some other problem to solve and then come back to yours.
Distraction. You are distracted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's go to another question that I mentioned early on that I wanted to talk to you about. How did you handle COVID, right? Because I believe that during COVID, it was actually the first time that SPH sort of went into the red as
Right.
well. So, like, how did that impact your role, the product organization within SPH? And, was there anything that you did differently that you learned during this time as well?
Right. Right. Very good question. I think for the impact for the product team as well as the engineering team was lesser, because many of us had come from organizations which were operating in a model of a multi-geography interaction. So at some point or the other, we had done video calls, we had done remote sessions, we had done remote backlog groomings and scrum meetings. We at some point in time, each and every one of us had done that. So For the product and the engineering team to operate remotely, only using Zoom calls, was sort of easier. What was more difficult was for getting the newsrooms accustomed to a way of working which is not in situ. So news breaks, and that's where the journalist has to be for him to be able to, um,
Be at the
send out
cutting
the
edge.
facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, send out the facts and write down something. Similarly, for the business teams who were always on the ground and had not been accustomed to, added to it the fact that SPH was on a digital transformation journey and people were not accustomed to video calls and so on and so forth. So it was a larger challenge managing stakeholders and getting them on board than doing product per se
I see.
or building technology per se. So those getting ground rules set up for video calling, making sure that equipment was there in every conference room, which are things that we take for granted many times. As product and tech people, when we come from different organizations, those things could not be taken for granted. So setting up processes, making sure that your teams are comfortable. So frequently checking in, like I used to send surprise gifts to my teams, even though they were small chocolates, not something very fancy, but just to make sure that we are all well and we are all connected, and that we are all in the same boat. Was how ASPH handled it. Also, that we are a media company, many things we get to know first, right? And so we had to react faster compared to the rest of the organizations. Also, the fact that we are frontliners, journalists were in the frontliner category. So we had to come to a model where we still had to allow people to be in office, some people to be in office, but those who could work from home had to work from home. And different newsrooms tried different techniques like rotating
Yeah.
journalists. And we even shipped machines, desktop machines, to people's houses so that they can work from there and the work doesn't stop. Of course, there was some slowdown in productivity, but it was all over. Our way of managing COVID was not dramatically different from how other frontline companies managed. And like I said, particularly to our team, the product and technology team, the impact is mostly stakeholder. When it comes down to working on ourselves or on our work, nothing got derailed. We were still shipping, and we were still shipping on time.
I see. Okay. Okay. But in terms of like dealing with COVID as well, was there a bigger pressure? Was there a bigger pressure on the digital side of things to deliver more, right? Or was that also not really an impact?
So I think people were very empathetic. So and the leadership team refrained from adding any additional pressure. Um, and the fact that good leadership also lends your teams to take responsibility on their own. Even if delays happen, we were okay with it, because we knew that it is a difficult working environment. And I think that is what gives confidence to employees also, because now you're working in an environment where you have kids around and you have noise levels are high, and you have to get involved. The distinction between work and life begins to disintegrate.
Yeah.
And I think that understanding was demonstrated heavily by SPH leadership. SPH leadership is very empathetic. We are in the business of empathy, and I think that's where it worked out really well. The only hiccup, I think, was when some of our employees, some of our co-workers had to return to their countries. Like some had to return to Malaysia, to India, or to China. for some emergency that they couldn't avoid. And the border restrictions forbid or stopped them from entering back into Singapore, especially if you were on employment passes.
Yeah.
I think that was a bigger struggle where we had to make sure that legally we are complying with labor laws of each country, Singapore and that country, and making sure that they are comforted outside in their own country that we are here, we are taking care of you, don't worry.
Okay, very nice, very nice. Okay, thank you so much. And again, I think there's so much more. Maybe I should, as I tell all my guests, maybe I should get you back for like a part two, because there's just so many things I still have. Just hearing you speak, I want to go into more. But I think we need to leave this for a next time. So yeah, now we need to go to the last part. And again, I alluded to this in the beginning where I was saying that Gaurav is actually quite the rocker himself. So we go into the song that you chose, and you chose Guns N' Roses, "Sweet Child of Mine." So that link is going to be up here. And yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Gaurav, why did you choose that song?
It was that song that made me realize that I could do rock. Until then, I was until then I was doing Bollywood. I was singing Bollywood, and I was singing Simon and Garfunkel and Beatles. And Sweet Child of Mine made me realize a different aspect of me that I had not discovered. It was a latent talent. And that started my journey into rock songs. And then I did Guns N' Roses, Deep Purple, Scorpions, and I also realized that my voice could match their pitches, Eagles, all of those classics. So that's why it brings me back to my roots. It keeps me grounded. And I think that is what is essential in life, whether you're a product manager or not. Just stay grounded, stay humble, and that's it.
Yeah, very nice. So I'll put a link as well to one of Gaurav's performances, which he shared with me. I gotta say, he'll give Axl Rose a run for his money. That was pretty awesome there. So very nice. So Gaurav, thank you so much for being on the show, and also just being very candid about how things were happening. How you traverse through your role from getting into product to being a product leader. So the last part would be, do you have anything that you would like to leave with our listeners and viewers as well? Any advice for the product folk who are listening in?
My only advice is never stop connecting with your users. For some of us, users would be very apparent and you could set up meetings with them. And for many of us, our users would be invisible. So find out of the box ways of connecting. Like I tell my product managers, publication product managers, that the person sitting next to you in the bus or in the train is your potential user. So get into the habit, get into the habit of cold calling, leave your inhibitions, and you would find that people in general in the world are very helpful. And just never lose that connection with your customers, and keep talking to them as and when you get a chance.
Perfect. So thanks to Gaurav again. So Gaurav is the Chief Product Officer of SPH Media. That's the guest that's been on the show, in case you were wondering who's that guy speaking. And yeah, I think it's always very enlightening to listen to leaders within the space talk about what they do. And who knows, maybe I will try and get Gaurav again for round 2 the next time.
Next time you're in Singapore, in Singapore, I will catch you at SPH office.
Nice. All right. So thank you all very much. You have a good day. And again, as Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries in Southeast Asia begin to open up a little bit more, do continue to stay safe. And also at the same time, go and meet friends that you've not met in a long time, have that cup of coffee with someone you haven't met in 2 years. And hopefully, we'll all come out on the other side safer and stronger as well. Have a good day, and bye-bye.